Now more than ever, transportation business owners need industry experts at every stage in their company's life cycle. We bring them to you in the hot seat.
Welcome to In the Hot Seat with the Tenney Group. I'm Spencer Tenney, and I'm so excited about our guest today, Dan Rosio from Katz, Sapper, and Miller. Dan, welcome to the Hot Seat.
Thank you, Spencer. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad that you're here, but before we heat things up, let's take 30 seconds and just tell our audience a little bit about your company and what you're doing there at KSM right now.
Okay. Yeah, I'm with Katz, Sapper, Miller. I'm a partner in charge of the Business Valuation Services Group. Katz Sapper is a large CPA, regional CPA consulting firm, primarily located in Indianapolis, Indiana, with about 300 professionals. And then I specifically run the Business Valuation Services Group within Katz, Sapper, Miller.
All right. Thank you for that, sir. Let's jump right in. So, valuation. What are some of the most common misconceptions when it comes to valuing a trucking or transportation company?
I think a lot of people think of trucking companies as very heavy equipment companies, which they are. So I think in the world of the people in the industry, I think one of the misconceptions that comes up a lot is that, my company's only worth, whatever my trucks are worth, and then maybe a little bit more from my drivers or some of my customers, and that's about it. So there's a lot more to do in business valuations than that, but that's what I hear quite a bit in the industry as far as when people are talking about what they think the value of their company is.
Well, in addition to that, I think people misunderstand the reasons for why they might need a valuation. So let's talk about that. What are some of the reasons that a transportation company would go to your firm and seek out a valuation?
Sure. So there are many reasons, but it all starts with, business owners a lot of the time think about what they're doing with their company and how they're going to exit their business at some point in the future. So if you want to roll that all into what I might call exit planning, business owners are thinking about whether they might sell or maybe they want to transfer their ownership through the company to their family members, or they might consider, other routes of exiting the business or letting other key people buy into the business, some way to get them and their equity out of the business, as they advance towards retirement. That's what I would call one reason in the world of doing business valuations for trucking companies. Unfortunately, there are other reasons that you run into issues with trucking companies that can be litigious related, or unfortunately, drivers have accidents and sometimes they're involved in litigation. So that's separate from traditional valuation, I think. But those are the two main reasons. Transferring wealth, selling the business, exiting the business is sort of the main driver of what we are involved with mostly in valuing trucking companies.
Yeah. I know another one when people come to us, partner disputes, things of that nature,
Sure.
partner buyouts.
Right.
That's another one that we've commonly flipped your direction to help folks within our network. So I'm curious, what are some of the most complex valuation projects that come your way?
Well, there are a lot of ones where there's multiple entities set up. So a common structure that you're familiar with in the trucking industry is where we have maybe a logistics company is one entity, and maybe the trucks and the trailers in one entity, and maybe the traditional trucking operations in a separate entity. So sometimes those can get fairly complex depending on how many different entities we're dealing with. Sometimes we value those all together. Sometimes we have to split them out. Sometimes there's a lot of intercompany things back and forth between the three companies. There's real estate involved occasionally that could be in a separate entity. So there are complex ones that we end up with, 3, 4, 5 entities. It's really not just one valuation. It's multiple different analyses all together in sort of one valuation. From the business owner's perspective, it's one valuation. From our perspective, it could be many valuations.
I understand that, sir, very much. So,
And it gets even more confusing when you're trying to sell the company. So you're trying to figure out what assets you're selling and which entities you're dealing with. And some could be structured as C Corps and some could be structured as S Corps or LLCs. And so there's outside of the valuation arena, there's obviously different tax implications for the sellers in certain situations.
So one of my passions, I love working with family-owned companies, and was just speaking with one today about the process of succession planning. And we're always talking about, well, we have to establish a baseline somewhere,
Yeah.
and with that valuation, um, and as part of it, that is what allows people to begin building value, to start addressing the gaps between where they are and where they want to be. If there
Right.
needs to be specialized expertise, that's where we can tag people in, like yourself, and then. But ultimately, folks resist getting an evaluation. So what are the common reasons why business owners resist something that's pretty basic as far as getting them on a path to building business value?
Well, it does start with the baseline. And so if you are brought in, which is what it sounds like, to help them kind of uh, hone in on maybe value drivers, um, I don't know what the resistance is so much, except that maybe companies think they know already or have a good handle on it already, and maybe don't perceive the independent view as being as much value as it really is from an outside expert appraiser looking at their financials. And what business owners need to understand is that all the diligence they have to go through in dealing with a business valuation that we bring to the table to do the product and do the work, they're going to have to go through that same process with the potential buyer. So, they sort of need to get used to that, getting through that diligence process anyway. And so going through the valuation exercise, might be helpful for them as they prepare to go through a real transaction in the future after they've created whatever addition of value they think they can create before they, you know, I guess the other problem I think I see with business owners is that they never want to think about the end of the end of the day when they're not the business owner. So
Right.
I think there's some fear that if I start down this process, then that means I'm really maybe not going to own my business one day. And I think that scares a lot of business owners, frankly.
No, I really like what you said about the familiarization of what's required to actually get a deal done. And the more practiced business owners are at that, the greater the experience is when a group like ours helps take them through a sale.
Right.
Um, in addition to the practice, there's also pure education. And so one of the things you and I have talked about offline are these misunderstandings about EBITDA versus adjusted EBITDA, multiples, and things of that nature that, when applied incorrectly, can be pretty damaging to business owners. So talk
Yeah.
about that a little bit, and how you've helped folks in that area.
Yeah. So there's, in the world of just businesses in general, not just trucking, there are certainly what I like to call, cocktail party terms thrown around the world.
Yes.
And business and business owners hear numbers and they talk to their buddies and they think that one company sold for some X multiple of EBITDA. And when they go through a valuation exercise, what I think they do get out of it is education and a better understanding of what those multiples really mean and the context of those multiples. So when you talk to people, especially when I do engagements when they're thinking about selling, and we start talking about add backs and different adjustments to their income statement which changes their EBITDA, and you can fill in the blanks a little bit more. But when you see those transactions in the world post transaction, the data that gets reported and what that company sold for in terms of an EBITDA multiple is potentially a much different number than what the buyer perceives they bought that company for. So if there were several add backs, that company may have sold for what appears to be 10, 12, 14 times EBITDA. And what the buyer bought was something that they think they really only paid 5 times EBITDA for. But the publicized number, what I will tell you, the number that's into the public is the one that appears they sold for 14 times. And there's a lot of things that can drive that number and make it very skewed, such as excess officer compensation or other adjustments, rent expense, things that a buyer may not be taking on, and that, but what that seller thinks they sold for is that high multiple, and those numbers get passed around between their friends and their networks, and they hear numbers that may not be as realistic. So taking them through a valuation exercise, you can explain all those differences in the perceptions, and so they better understand when they hear things on the street what. And the other, and I'll continue, some deals are asset deals, a lot of deals are asset deals, and some are stock deals. Very few are stock deals, and so subtracting debt from one transaction and not subtracting it from another makes the number very different as well. And when you hear people talk about what they sold their business for, you don't really know if they're talking about before they paid their debt off or after they paid their debt off. And in the trucking, heavy equipment industry, those are some big numbers in most transactions.
Well, and I think that's a great point, as far as making sure you mentioned context. What a great word that is, as far as no matter what's going on, no matter what you read, no matter how credible the source is,
Right.
You can only apply that if you understand the context in which it's being used. And so I really appreciate you sharing that word with our audience here. So last question, a little bit of a wild card here for you, sir. You're based in Indianapolis, a lot of sports teams. We got the Pacers. We got the Colts. Who else do we got out there? I don't even know.
Well, we got two. We have Major League, NFL football. We've got NBA basketball with the Pacers, and we've got three AAA baseball with the Indianapolis Indians. And then we have, if you want to go into soccer, we've got basically second level pro soccer through what's called Indy 11. So that's a notch below the MLS division, basically.
So my question is this: you need to wine and dine your number one client. What sporting event there in Indianapolis are you going to take them to for the best experience?
I think you have to take people to a Colts game, in my opinion. So those are the funnest events, I think. Pacers are good, but I think people enjoy the Colts games better even than the Pacer games. The suites are really nice, and especially when we play, your Tennessee Titans twice a year, it's always a fun game to go to.
I bet it is. I hope you get a Derrick Henry stiff arm when he comes.
He's a tough guy to tackle. I can tell you that. That's for sure.
That he is. Well, listen. This has been a great time. I appreciate you sharing your knowledge with our audience, getting a little bit of an insight, focus on context, focus on getting the right information on the path to doing good things in the trucking industry. So we're going to leave it right there. Thank you for being in the hot seat, sir. We'll see you next time.